On the previous video, I asked you to pull out a blank piece of paper and try your best to draw the circular flow diagram, which we already learned in the principles class, right? Now, the first thing we need to be sure is, with that diagram, what do we want to show? Okay? We want to show the relationship or the interaction among people within the economic system, right? And more specifically, we want to show the interaction between households and firms. Okay, so that's why we here we put the households in one box and put the firm in another box. Okay. Loosely speaking, you can take households as the consumers and take the firms as producers. Okay, and the households and the firms within this economic system are connected by two markets, or you could say two types of the markets. The first one is a market for goods and services, okay, where the consumers can always buy, for example, cars, computers, or legal and financial consultants as a type of service, right? And another type of markets is markets for factors of productions, where the firms can buy or rent these factors of productions from the households, such as labor, land, and technology. Okay. All right. And here you can also find that the households pay their consumption. Okay, and that becomes the firm's revenue, so it flows to the pocket of the firms. Okay, and then the firms needs to pay the factors of production they used in the productive activities, right, which becomes the income of the household. Okay, and once the households receive income, they have to pay taxes to the government. Okay, so the government would also spend money purchasing what they need. For example, computers they need in their offices, right? Pickup trucks they need for their like the construction crews, right? If the taxes as a government revenue exceeds its spending, then the government saves, right? So that's called the public saving. And the same thing, or the similar thing, could happen to our households. If our income exceeds our consumption, then we would have private saving. Okay, private saving and public saving are going to flow into the financial market because we want to make more money for us, right? So we're going to do the investment. All right. So this is a relatively more complicated version of the circular flow diagram. Okay, I would expect you at least to be able to draw, the households, firms, and the two markets. So that's the simplest version. Okay. Now, of course, on the top of that, you can add the government, you can add the financial markets, and different, components over there. All right. Now, the reason we want to show you or we want to review the circular flow diagram is because we're going to use these as our, the treasure hunting map. Okay, so it will lead us through this very complicated chapter. Okay, I made, for example, more than 40 slides on this chapter, so we're going to spend several meetings talking about this one. All right. Now, because this neoclassical model or the national income is relatively challenging, so we would like to start with something easier, something more accessible to us. That's why we're going to start with the market for goods and services. Okay, because you and me, everyone is a consumer. We make purchases on daily basis, so we're pretty familiar with these markets. Okay, so that's why the first section of this chapter we talk about what determines the aggregate supply of goods and services. Okay, And once we figure out the aggregate supply, by the way, aggregate means total, means gross. Okay, so once we understand the gross supply of goods and services, how much we need, okay, what do we need, then the firms would start, organizing the production. Okay, and to be able to do that, they turn around and go to the market for factors of production, because they need labor, land, machinery, equipment, and technologies to be able to produce, right? So the firms are going to be on the demand side of these factors market. Okay, so we're going to talk about what determines the aggregate demand for factors in the second section of this chapter. All right. Now, once we understand the aggregate demand, we would be able to know, how much money the household can make by providing land, labor, and other things to the firms. Okay, so once we know that, we can talk about, the national income distributed among the factors. Okay, especially the income distribution between the capital owners and workers. Okay, and it's still going to be in the second section of this chapter. All right. Now, once households figure out how much money they can make, they would be able to decide how much, what, and how much they would like to consume. Right? It's their consumption. So we're kind of going back to the market for goods and services and talk about what determines the aggregate demand for goods and services, because the households are going to be on the demand side. Okay, the firms are going to be on the supply side of this market. All right, and so that's the third section of this chapter. All right, and finally, in the last section of this chapter, we're going to put the supply and demand together on this market for goods and services and talk about market equilibrium. Okay, so once we know supply and demand, we can find the equilibrium. We can also talk about what determines the equilibrium here. Okay, now here you should realize that, once this market is reaching its equilibrium, then this market is clear as well. Okay, in other words, what we're talking about in this chapter is so-called a general equilibrium instead of the partial equilibrium. Partial equilibrium means we narrowly focus on the specific market, like the market for pickup trucks, market for macroeconomics textbooks, stuff like that. Okay, the general equilibrium means all the markets in this economic system, okay, are all clear instead of just one market. All right. If you don't understand this, the difference between the partial and the general market equilibriums, that's fine. Okay, because towards the end of the semester, we're going to come back and re-explain this. All right. Okay, so this is the roadmap of the whole chapter. Okay, now since the next video, we're gonna start talking about the first one. Okay, the aggregate supply of goods and services. All right.